Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here this afternoon. As you know, and you probably read through the media, that we have been going around the country, essentially holding public consultations. We've had consultations with, of course, high schools. We started yesterday with university campuses. We were at your campus at Natambua, FNU Natambua campus yesterday. The budget, as you may have heard, in fact gets delivered on the 29th of June. And then, of course, by law, we have to wait for about a week before then Parliament can actually debate the budget that's presented to Parliament. The financial year in Fiji now has changed. The financial year now is on the 1st of August. It begins on the 1st of August and ends on the 31st of July. This is why now budgets are called the budget of 2017-18. And the budget will be of 17-18. They'll be delivered on the 29th of June. The one thing, of course, normally when the budget is presented, the budget, of course, does not get approved, nor does it come into effect until the 1st of August. The one thing that does come into effect immediately after the announcement of the budget, of course, is any increase or decrease in any tariff rates. So, as you know, last year we started delivering the budgets in the evening. The idea is to get as maximum exposure as possible, so people are able to listen to it in after hours. So should any tariff reduction or increase be announced, that comes into effect immediately midnight after that night that it is announced on. We've already had the Permanent Secretary for Economy has already had one round of consultations with the respective ministries. She's sat across the table with the PS of the respective ministries, and she's had that first round of consultations. From Monday next week, I sit together with her on one side, and we have the respective ministers and their permanent secretaries on the other side, and we again go through the respective ministry budgets. In your case, of course, the Ministry of Education will be presenting the FNU budget. As a matter of interest, FNU gets about $58 million from the Fijian government every year for the running of your university, including any capital expenditure. And what we normally do is I go through a very short presentation to give you a perspective on the economy, or give you some facts and figures that are actually put together by the Reserve Bank of Fiji, which is an independent body that carries out these assessments, and to contextualize what are the things that we do actually take into account when developing a budget, and what are some of the sort of various phrases and terminologies that we do use. In respect of the consultations, I see that most of the lecturers are sitting up at the front and the students are all at the back. I would have rather had the students in the front and the lecturers at the back, because, to be frank, this is a time for the students, not for the teachers or the lecturers. And we also, in respect of the questions, we would like to have questions from the students, not from the teachers, because this is a time for the students. We are trying to engage with the young people of Fiji. 69.4% of the entire population of Fiji is below the age of 40. So those of you who are below the age of 40, you are in the majority, I'm in the minority, so are those people over the age of 40. Of course, it does bring about a number of implications for the budget. Recently, I've just returned from Japan, where they have a very large bulk of their population who are what they call the super aging. Nearly a third of their budget is actually spent on looking after elderly people, or finding means to, cater for them. So these are the kind of priorities. Those of you, of course, who are below the age of 40, and 70% of you are below the age of 40, in about 30 years' time, you'll all become old. That's something that's an undeniable fact. Everybody becomes old. So the demographic spread, of course, is that at the moment you're all at the bottom end of the age group. In 30 years' time, you'll be all up in the top end. So it has implications in terms of our development strategy, in terms of how we plan for our budgets. Let's start off with the first slide. These are the economic growth rates for the Fijian economy. As you can see, since 2010, we have been growing consecutively for the past 7 years. This is only the second time in Fijian history, post-independent history, have we had 7 years of consecutive growth. The growth, of course, these figures as of last year, and you can see that one of the reasons why we like economic growth, of course, is that because it creates economic opportunities. When economic opportunities are created, it means that you have creation of jobs, you have more robustness within the economy. As a government, our job is to also be mindful of the fact that even though you may have economic growth, that economic growth is actually spread out equally. It is not growth only skewered towards a handful of people. Fiji, as a matter of interest, recently there's a survey done where they found that Fiji was only one of the 5 countries in the entire Asia-Pacific region where inequality has actually decreased. So in other words, the spread of the growth is actually being shared by a lot more commonly amongst the general population. I've had questions asked, and I'm going to preempt some of the questions. Of course, people have said, what are you doing to create jobs? This is one of the things that we're trying to do, is obviously when you grow the economy, you're actually creating jobs, and indeed you try and sustain jobs through economic growth. Next, please. What are the areas that contribute towards this growth? Agriculture contributes about 0.31%, but fisheries and forestry is very low. Because obviously when it's very low, it means there's a lot of potential in that area. We need to be able to recognize what are the things that we can do to try and improve that. Agriculture, as you know, has been in Fiji still fairly backward in the sense that we don't use much technology in agriculture. One of the reasons for that is because the finance available in the agricultural sector has been extremely limited. Majority of the land in Fiji is leased land. Majority of the farmers who have farms actually are on leased land, and they can only get, or until recently, only could get leases up to 30 years. Therefore, that land is not used as collateral, cannot be used as collateral for a farmer to go up to the bank and say, look, I've got a lease, can you give me some money, I want to buy 5 tractors or harvesters or whatever it is. Of course, on the other hand, you find most of the tourism leases, they are on Itauke land, but they get 99-year leases. So those hotels or owners of those properties are able to go to the banks, get a loan, build a hotel or renovate the hotel, and they're able to participate a lot better in the marketplace. Whereas the farming sector is very limited. Most commercial banks, in fact, none of the commercial banks do large-scale lending in the agricultural sector because precisely of that reason. Now, of course, the law has changed. There's the opportunity now to have land leases for up to 99 years. I understand the Minister for Lands, just about a week and a half ago, gave out agricultural leases for up to 99 years for as far as state land was concerned in Ba. Manufacturing, we of course manufacture a lot of things in Fiji. It's quite significantly high there. We make sewage pipes, water pipes, we make furniture, we make all sorts of things in Fiji now. Over here is also sugar manufacture is also included in manufacturing as opposed to sugar cane production. Construction contributes rather significantly. Please remember that these figures are as of October 2016, in other words, the year of Cyclone Winston. Now, generally what that does when you have a cyclone, it does dampen the demand for certain services. Notwithstanding that you see construction is high, I would venture to say that if you were to look at the construction industry this calendar year, you would see that construction would be contributing a lot more because a lot more construction is taking place. Government has, of course, extended its capital expenditure. We're building something like 225 schools or rebuilding them, and we're spending approximately $180 million simply in building schools. So construction would be a lot heavier. Construction is good, ladies and gentlemen, because construction also creates jobs. You need somebody to dig the foundation, somebody to put the steel, somebody to pour the concrete, somebody to paint the building, somebody to put plumbing works, somebody to do electrical work, somebody to put the roof. It creates a lot more robustness, a lot more money goes into people's pocket, they go and spend that money, and of course, it creates that critical mass that's required. The services sector has significantly also contributing to the growth, financial, transport, wholesale, retail, and accommodation. We can come back and ask questions on that if you want to elaborate on that. We believe the services sector has enormous potential. Today in Fiji, there are more SIM cards in operation than actual people in Fiji. I know a lot of you have 2 SIM cards. Some of you have it for the right reasons, some of you have it for the wrong reasons. But of course, at the same time, there's something like 500,000 smartphones in operation. We made a strategic decision a few years ago to zero-rate duty on smartphones because the internet penetration in Fiji was low. So we believe that internet penetration can be enhanced if we had more broad-based internet accessibility. And that's why a lot of you have Facebook, you have internet access, you have data access, precisely because of smartphones. So that was a strategic decision made, and we believe as a result of the technological uptake that we have in Fiji, we have the ability to grow the ICT sector. We have the ability to grow, for example, call centers, back-end processing, data processing, and we are working in those areas. The trick, just to go back to the slide, please, the trick is, of course, for any government to ensure that we have a broad-based economic growth. If we actually have economic growth driven by only one or two sectors, then you are leaving yourself vulnerable. So hypothetically, if we were to only depend on tourism and, say, one agricultural produce, and if you have a cyclone that causes damage to all the hotel properties, a majority of them, and damages your agricultural products, then you're actually in dire straits. But if you have a number of sectors contributing to economic growth, then you're able to spread that risk that you would have. What are the things that the RBF looks at? So investment indicators, the value of building permits in that period went up by 12.5%. Value of work went up by 10.5%. Domestic cement sales. As I said to the high school students, people don't buy cement to keep it underneath their house. They buy cement to build things. So that's a sign of people actually being a lot more active in the economy. Government capital expenditure increased to about increased by 7.8%. In other words, government is spending more money in capital expenditure. Imports of investment goods means that more plant and equipment and machinery are being bought, which of course increases your productive capacity. It also means that you are potentially have growth of employment. Investment lending, lending for real estate, lending for building construction actually went down in that period. Consumption indicators. New vehicle registration went up by 27.5%. This new vehicle registration. Second-hand vehicle registration went up by 7.8%. I'm sure many of you can testify to the fact there's a lot of traffic jams now. It takes probably over an hour to travel from Nasinu to Suva in peak period. That's precisely the reason, one of the reasons it's happening is because a lot more people have access to cars now. People in Fiji, of course, see buying a car as a sign of your social mobility in society. People like to say, my son or daughter is doing really well, they've now bought a car for themselves. Traveling by bus no longer is an option. People see generally traveling by bus in Fiji as something you don't do when you don't, you do necessarily when you don't have enough money. So we need to obviously in a few years' time rethink the way we think about transportation. We need to make traveling by buses a lot more sexier at the end of the day. That's what happens overseas. You'll find people who have high-paying jobs in Sydney and Auckland, they'll actually catch public transportation. Very rarely you'll find somebody in a suit catching a bus in Suva or Fiji generally. New lending to wholesale retail increased by 13.2%. Imports of consumption goods, these are things that we wear, that we use. The watch I'm wearing, the belt I'm wearing, the shoes I'm wearing, the clothes that I'm wearing, maybe it's sewn in Fiji, but the fabric comes from overseas. When you have increase in consumption goods, in other words, people are spending a lot more money. PAYE has gone up. This is pay as you earn tax. Normally when you work, that gets deducted. Of course, we've increased the income tax threshold. Before, if you earn more than $8,600, you pay taxes. Today, you don't pay any taxes until you earn more than $16,000. But normally, PAYE will go up when people's salaries go up, or there are more jobs being created because a lot more people are in the market and therefore they're contributing to PAYE. New job advertisements went up by 15.1%. Personal remittances, we have soldiers in the British Army, we have security personnel in the Middle East, we have rugby players, we have people who are your friends and relatives living offshore. We have caregivers in the west coast of North America who send money back home. So the remittances have gone up. Remittances are the second largest foreign exchange earner for us in Fiji. The highest, of course, being tourism contributes most of the foreign exchange. Variable consumption increased, even though VAT has decreased from 15% to 9%, the collection increased. New lending to private individuals decreased for that period. This is just to put into perspective, vehicle registration, light blue is second-hand vehicle registration, dark blue is new vehicle registration. We of course like the dark blue because newer cars means newer technology, less carbon footprint, and better technology, cars last longer. Just look at the comparison. 2005, there were 6,000 second-hand vehicles registered. 2016, 10,000 vehicles registered second-hand. New vehicles 3,300, nearly 5,000 in 2016. So you can see the huge increase, and you can see the uptake over here. It went up. We decreased the duty on zero-rated duty on hybrid cars. We also decreased the duty overall if you bought a car less than 2,500 cc. So we decreased the duty to 15%. Used to be 32%. Made it a bit more affordable. Banks are participating in the car lending sector. But if you bought a vehicle 2,500 or more, because you are rich and you can afford a vehicle, therefore we charge an additional 10,000. If you buy a vehicle that is more than 3,000 cc, you pay, apart from the duty and the excise duty, you pay another $20,000. So the thinking is, if you can buy a BMW, you obviously are wealthy enough to buy it. So therefore, you must pay the additional $20,000, because that way we are able to compensate the people at low end of the socioeconomic scale to make the duty less for them so they can afford to have a vehicle. Retail sales, this basically measures, retail sales in the shops. As you can see, that speaks for itself. It's been increasing since 2007. We heard a few troughs here, but on average, the retail sales have grown by 7.1%. Inflation. Generally, inflation, ladies and gentlemen, gets affected by things like tropical cyclones. This is why we don't like tropical cyclones. It kills people. It causes emotional, physical, psychological damage. It has a huge impact on the price of goods. Those of you who live in Suva, you can see over here, generally the inflation rate was 2% or just slightly over that. But Winston came along and it peaked up here. A bunch of bananas in Suva immediately after Cyclone Winston was costing 20 bucks. Yongona till today costs $110 in the Western Division. Consumption rate has not decreased, despite the $110. But that's the huge impact. A bundle of long beans used to cost $5 after cyclone. Now it's about $2. It's stabilized. So that's what it lends to inflation. As you can see, there's a downward trend there. It's come down to 4.1%. It is in fact excess of 5% over there. It's coming down. We expect that to come down in short to medium term. Foreign reserves. A lot of people don't understand this. As I was saying, that we buy a lot of things from overseas. So this young lady, she's wearing sneakers. She's got this bag. She's got a watch. She's got a ring. She's got the earrings. Maybe buying from Japan, maybe buying from Australia, buying in New Zealand, or buying from USA. We need to trade in US dollars. We need to trade in Japanese yen. We need to trade in Australian dollars. $1 billion worth of our fuel comes from Singapore. We need Singapore dollars also, if you're trading in Singapore dollars or maybe US dollars. So your foreign reserves is an indication of how healthy you are as an economy. International benchmark shows that you must have, these are the number of months, that you must have at least 4 months worth of foreign reserves to be in a healthy position. And generally, international banks, etc., or companies that look at investing, they actually look at your level of foreign reserves. Because if you have healthy foreign reserves, they know you're not going to have restrictions in them to move out their profits. When Fiji Airways went and bought the 3 brand new A330s, when they get the European banks financing for that, they actually look at things like foreign reserves. That actually helps determine the pricing of the loan. In other words, the interest rates will come down if your foreign reserves are good. 2005, we had $549 million worth of foreign reserves, about 2.3 months worth of trading. Today, we have a record highest ever it's been in Fiji, $2.1 billion worth of foreign reserves, about 5.8 months worth of trading we can do with our foreign reserves. So that's a healthy position, but of course we wanted to go even higher. Next slide, please. Now, all governments since the Ratumara government days, post-independence Fiji, has run a fiscal deficit, except probably about 3 times. Fiscal deficit means that you spend more than what you actually have. We are a developing country. We are a post-colonial country. As you know, that most post-colonial countries actually have to catch up with development. As I was mentioned, a lot of people are shaking their head when I was in the Western Division. If you go to many of the FSC sites, we had all the CSR people living in their houses, they're the only ones who got the water and electricity. People just around them, the villages around them, the farms around them did not have water and electricity. Only they had the electricity. So it was very restricted in terms of economic development. So we need to spend money to be able to get the productive capacity to increase in your country. However, the trick is to manage it. You need to have reasonable deficits. Otherwise, if your deficit gets blown out, in other words, you keep on having these lines longer than what is required, then you can run into issues. We have had a policy to reduce our deficit. It gets affected by things like such as cyclones. We were coming down here. We've spent an additional almost $220 million because of Cyclone Winston, and $180 million at least on schools. So if Winston had not occurred, this line would have been much shorter and probably sitting somewhere over there. So that's a result of, those type of aberrations that affects your ability to contain your deficits. Government revenue. Government needs to make money too, because you need to pay for your operating expenditure. Government had a revenue of $1.1 billion in 2004. Today we have a revenue of $3.1 billion, almost tripled it. And the way you do that is because you think of smarter ways of dealing business. So even though, for example, we reduce corporate tax rate, it used to be 33%, now it's 20%. What it does, it increases compliance. So as we know, a lot of businesses, or some businesses, steal from the system. They have two books. One book is kept for FIRCA, one book is kept for themselves. The one for themselves is the one that's got the true records. One for FIRCA means they pay less taxes. So we need to be able to increase compliance. So we go after people who avoid tax. In that way, you also increase your revenue. We, of course, have introduced some other progressive types of taxation that helps contribute towards the revenue gain. What are the areas that contribute towards the revenue? Direct taxes, corporate tax, personal tax, value-added tax, customs is 21%. We still believe there's a lot of leakage there. There are a lot of business houses who actually under-declare the value of goods they bring in. They may bring in $10 million worth of goods, but they say they're bringing in 2, so they pay less duty. And when they get caught, then they say, oh, sorry, we made a mistake. Then they try and pay for the balance. So we've tightened the laws. We have harsher penalties. And we, of course, want to prosecute people in that area. And we can, of course, you can ask me questions on this later on. Now, what we've done here for you, we've actually grouped what you may call the social category of expenditure. Social protection, which is welfare, and I'll go into detail. Access to justice, which is predominantly legal aid. Education, which concerns you. Health and infrastructure development. And done by way of a comparison, what it used to be, say, about 10 years ago, was about $1.3 billion. Today it's about $3.6 billion that we spend in those areas. Infrastructure, as you know, we're spending a lot of money in infrastructure. We're trying to build back better. There's a lot of infrastructure that's very old. As you know, that recently there was, I don't know how many of you have been through Flagstaff and various other places, all the way to Kinoya. There's a lot of digging going up. A lot of those electrical cables are about 40, 50 years old. They have not been replaced. We need to replace them. The productive capacity has increased. We need more demand. We need to replace those that infrastructure. I don't know how many of you have recently been to Nandi. If you see the 4-lane roads, the trick question that I used to ask the high school students was, apart from the 4-lane roads, what else do you see different? And the answer, of course, is there's no overhead cables. All the electrical cables, all the telecom cables are all underground. With Cyclone Winston, about 6,000 kilometers of electrical cables went down. Now, we've all put them back up. God forbid we have another cyclone next year, it'll go back down again. We put it back up again, it goes back down again. So we are trying to build resilience in our infrastructure. Of course, if it goes underground, there's nothing to blow down. The other thing that we're also discovering and are also addressing, most roads, excuse me, when they used to build roads in Fiji, and a lot of the roads are still there, if the road is here, they put the water pipes underneath the road. They put the electrical cables underneath the road if they did go underground. So when there is, for example, a leak in the pipe, we don't know about it. The ground gets softer, the trucks go over it, the cars go over it, and we have all these wonderful things called potholes, and they appear. Then eventually when they do discover there's actually a leak in the water pipe, you dig up the road to fix up the water pipe. You fix up the water pipe, you don't necessarily fix up the road. So what we've done, for example, in Nandi, with the 4-laning of the roads, all those things have been taken out and put on the side of the road. So next time there's a leakage, you actually just fix up the pipe, you don't have to dig up the road. So that's what you call building back better. We're building resilience into the infrastructure. Health, yes, you'll see some increase in health, but ladies and gentlemen, the problem with health for us is not necessarily infrastructure, but human capital. There is nobody in Fiji at the moment, no Fijian doctor available, or a couple of doctors available full-time, that if I now have a heart attack, they can carry out an open heart surgery on me. It's a tragedy, 21st century. We don't even have a qualified speech therapist in the country. This is why the topper scholarship is skewed towards science subjects. So the reason why we don't have that capacity is because there has not been a concerted effort to build the capacity. We have not trained our doctors enough. Once they become graduates and they come into the public health system, we have not sent them overseas. We have not given them the exposure to actually become that specialist. Becoming a cardiac surgeon takes 10 to 15 years to be able to be very good at it. You need the level of exposure, you need the level of training. That is our major issue. The other issue with the health system, of course, is what we call the supply chain challenges and the logistics challenges. You know, there's a lot of talk about medicine not being available. It's not because government cannot procure it or because there's a shortage of funds. It's because the system does not cater for the ability to move medicine around. Recently, we were in India where the Indian government a few years ago developed software where you can get real-time data. So we went to the state called Rajasthan. There's about 70 million people, and we went to the warehouse, the pharmaceutical warehouse. At the click of a button, you were able to see exactly, for example, how much or how many Panadol each health station, hospital, health dispensary has. So, for example, if there's an outbreak of typhoid or diarrhea in Singatoka, and everybody needs to get the diarrhea fixed up in particular tablets, you will be able to see that the stocks are coming down rapidly. So you will say, well, hang on, there's a lot of stock available in Lautoka, let's move it to now Singatoka. At the moment, the supply chain issue has not been addressed. And we hope to do that in the next 6 months. We're going to address those issues. Education, of course, now education gets almost $600 million a year. I assume that a lot of you here in this room have TELS or our topper. We expect that level of funding to increase because some of you may be in second or third year. Some of you would be in first year. There's still many more to come. So we expect, before we go for the full cycle, we expect that level of funding to increase quite significantly. And of course, we now have free education. As I said to a number of the gatherings, the amount of times if I kept aside $1 for people who said to me, we wish we had free education in high school, I would have actually finished high school. I was a very good student, but my parents could not afford to send me to school because there were 5 or 6 of us. And they had to make a choice. Invariably also, when they had to make a choice, the girls used to stay at home because they would eventually get married and be looked after by the husband. That was the thinking. So you had also gender disparity in that respect. Of course, the number of times also I've had so many people say to us that, you know, I used to come first or second or third in my class, but my parents could not afford to send me to university, and today I'm a mechanic. I wish we had TELS in those days or a scholarship. I would have been able to get that level of education. Access to justice is about legal aid. We now have legal aid offices. I think there's about 14 or 15 of that. Essentially, legal aid means that we have a lot of women who need access to maintenance payments. We provide assistance to them. A lot of, you know, just because you come from the lower end of the socioeconomic scale, just because you've been charged with a criminal offense, it does not mean you should not get representation. Legal aid gives them representation. We also have people, they also draft wills. Just because you may be poor, it does not mean you should not have a will. You may have one house, you may want to will it. A lot of people also die what they call interstate. In other words, die without drafting a will or making a will. So we help family members resolve that through legal aid. Social protection is what we call generally in Fiji social welfare payments. We give social welfare payments up to about $30 million. Disabled people, abandoned children, single mothers, people below the poverty line. We started this program. You'd be surprised how many people in Fiji don't have FNPF. You know, people who live in villages, people who are farmers, people who are fishermen. They've never worked formally anywhere. So they don't actually have FNPF. So now that they're old, they don't actually have a pension. So a lot of them, you'd be surprised, also get abandoned by the children. The children no longer look after them, or they moved to Suva or to the big city or moved overseas. So we started a modest sum of $30 a month for those people over the age of 70 a few years ago. Today you get $50 if you are 66 years and older. And that social protection comes from there too. We also give a food voucher for rural pregnant women, because we want pregnant women to have access to nutritious food. If they don't have that, of course, the babies they give birth to will be malnourished. It poses obviously problems for the mother, problems for the child, but also in terms of the development of the child, it will put a lot more pressure on the public health system. Next, please. Expenditure mix. This is very important to understand. Whenever you spend money, there are certain amounts of money that you will spend for running your day-to-day operations. And the other amount of money, which is the capital expenditure, is what you use to build things. So the FNU budget, which we give $58 million, of that, only 7 or 13 million. So only $13 million is for capital expenditure. The balance of the 58 million, which is $45 million, goes into running your university, paying for your lecturers' salaries, your electricity costs, whatever it is, the day-to-day running, your photocopying paper, all of those things. So that's your operating expenditure. Now for a government, it is critical for us to spend a high amount of money in capital expenditure, in particular if you are borrowing money. Because you got to show something for your debt. The example that I used with the high school students, just to simplify it for the high school students, I said, if you all decide to go and have a party at McDonald's, maybe in your case would be, I don't know, whatever it's called, Golden Dragon or something nowadays. But if you decide to go and have a party, or you don't have enough money, you go to the bank and you say, we want to have a party. Can you please lend us some money? And they say, okay, we'll give you the money. You have your party, you finish your burgers, you finish your drinks. You wake up in the morning, you got nothing to show for it. The food is gone, the drinks are gone, but the debt is still there. So if we are going to borrow money, we need to be able to have something to show for it. So it's better to have government spending more, highly focused on capital expenditure. 2004, 83% of the money that the government spent in that annual budget went into operating expenditure. We recently went to the Western Division yesterday. We stayed at the hotel, my salary, the PS's salary, all the civil servants' salary, the fuel cost, the hotel accommodation comes out of operating expenditure. The photocopying paper, the toilet paper they use, it's all come from operating expenditure. Capital expenditure in 2004 was only 17%. Today, 60% is into operating expenditure, but a whopping 40% goes into capital expenditure. So we want to spend a lot more money in capital expenditure because we're building for the future. You've got something to show for it. Again, the funding for roads and bridges, you can see just the point of difference as I highlighted to you. This is the good old PWD days, $55 million. Some people, I understand, want it back. $527 million now goes towards roads, bridges, and jetties. That goes to show we're building infrastructure. Water and energy, again, those of you who may come from rural areas, before, if you wanted to be connected to the FEA grid, if there was, for example, 20 homes, they said you have to pay 10% for connection. So if there were 20 homes, everybody had to contribute. Sometimes out of the 20 homes, only 10 gives a contribution, the money just sits there, nothing gets done. So government has returned all that money now to all those individuals who gave the money. And we say you don't need to make a contribution, we'll do it on our own bat. So we have a long list of places that needs to be connected. That's where a lot of the money is going into. We also pay for electricity. So the way that we say we have a progressive approach to taxation, before the thinking in the previous governments was that we must keep electricity costs down. So there was an overall electricity cost is about 24 cents a unit. But the point is, when you have the same cost or same tariff rate being applied across the board, the rich person also benefits. So a person who's got 5 air conditioners in his house and has got a swimming pool pays the same rate as a person who's got only 1 refrigerator and earns $10,000 a year. There needs to be a differentiation. So the way that we've done it is this. As you would have seen, if you earn less than $30,000 a year in the household, we subsidize your electricity directly for you. We pay 17 cents out of the 34 cents cost unit of electricity. So the tariffs have gone up to the realistic figure of 34 cents. But those people who are the low income bracket, even those people who do the, the prepay with the coins, those people also only pay 17 cents, whereas the person who actually has a swimming pool and 5 air conditioners pays the 34 cents. So in that way, you have what you call specific targeted poverty alleviation mechanisms. We also give, free water. So 90,250 liters of free water. How did we come about with that figure? The World Health Organization has told us that you and I as individuals need 50 liters of free water a day to clean ourselves, go to the toilet, cook, clean, wash. And so they worked on that based on 5 people in a household. You multiply that, extrapolate that for the whole year, it comes over 90,000 liters of free water, if you are connected to the Water Authority Fiji grid. Education, of course, $598 million. Free education all the way from kindergarten up to year 13. And of course the toppers and the TELs. We expect this to go up even more next year. Because a lot more people coming through the system. A lot more people are coming through the system. There's many more of you. So we have to be able to cater for that in the budget. We believe that this will probably go up for another 2 years, then it will reach an equilibrium over there. So we'll know exactly what the figure is, because we would have gone through the full 3 or 4 year cycle. Next, please. Health, as I said, you can see funding has increased, but as I've mentioned about the need for more specialist skill sets and more human resources capital. If you do your MBBS and you join government as a doctor, all your postgraduate studies at FNU, we pay for it. It's free, because we want people to specialize in that area. And we've given doctors an 80% pay rise, almost up to 80%. Operating revenue. This is how much money we make from there to there in operating revenue, operating expenditure. We have an operating savings of that much. It's gone up, as you can see, compared to what it was in 2004. This is a good position to be in. Of course, we want this greener line or greener section to be a lot more thicker, and we're working towards that. So we need to be a lot more robust. We're quite mamangi in the way that we run government operations to be able to have more savings. When we have more savings, we borrow less. Next, please. This is very important, ladies and gentlemen. A lot of people talk about debt without necessarily understanding debt. The figure we need to be concerned about is the graph is this one here, which is your debt to GDP ratio. GDP is essentially the value of your goods and services produced in a country. So generally you measure debt based on your GDP. So your debt nominal amount may increase, but you can see as a result, as a percentage of GDP has been decreasing. This line would have gone down even further, except if it wasn't for Winston. Because of Winston, we had to borrow an additional about $200 million just for the rebuild. So if Winston had not occurred, this line would have gone down even further. Just to give you an example, in very, very simple terms, if I explain to the high school students, assuming your GDP is for Fiji is $100, and we go and borrow $20. So your debt to GDP ratio is 20%. 20 over 100, 20%. But assuming your GDP value increases to $500, but you go and borrow $50, you've almost doubled and 2.5 times more than what you originally borrowed. But as a percentage of GDP, 50 or 500 is only 10%. So in nominal terms, which is this one here, you've actually borrowed more in dollar value, nominal terms. But as a percentage of your GDP, because you are more wealthier now, it's come down. The debt to GDP ratio has decreased. Many countries, you have to make the assessment. So sometimes you need to go and borrow to do the capital investment. And I'll show you in the next slide what some countries have done. Because you may need to spend in a particular area, because if you do that, you may incur debt, but it's for the long-term productive gain for the country. So if we are, for example, now we're taking electricity all the way around Viti Levu. So those areas in northwest Viti Levu, up in Ra and Tailevu and Naitasiri and all those places, now if they get electricity, the guy who's catching fish and selling by the roadside, normally if he doesn't have electricity, he has to sell the fish by that day. Otherwise the fish will rot. So he may actually sometimes undersell the fish in terms of the pricing. Normally we sell it for $20, it's getting dark, he has to sell it, he may sell it for you for $5. So you come along and get a good bargain. Or he has to eat it himself. He's probably sick and tired of eating fish. But if he has electricity, he can keep it in the cooler. And he brings it out the next day, pours water on it, you go along and buy a nice fresh fish and you take it away. And he gets $20 for it. So you are actually increasing his rate of return on his fish. You are increasing his capacity to earn more. This is why infrastructure, targeted infrastructure is very, very critical to be able to help people have improved livelihoods. So this, ladies and gentlemen, sorry, just go back. This is the line to watch. When anybody talks about nominal debt, it doesn't really matter unless you contextualize it within as a percentage of your GDP. Just by comparison, we've got countries. Look at Japan's debt to GDP ratio, 239.2%. In other words, they're borrowing 239% more than the actual GDP. The USA is over 107%. Of course, they still have AAA ratings. I mean, this is the unfortunate thing about the international market economy. That these countries, can you imagine if we had that? We'll be, in a very different situation altogether. But they have the capacity to do that. Some comparable countries, Maldives, which is in the Indian Ocean, 81.5%, Seychelles, 68.6%, Nauru, Mauritius that everybody talks about. Mauritius is comparable to Fiji, similar. They also have a sugarcane industry initially. I was there, fortunate enough to be in Mauritius earlier this year. They don't even have a single river in Mauritius. They have to build huge dams to have water security. But a few years ago, Mauritius, like what we are doing now, made a very tactical move. They decided to invest quite heavily in infrastructure. So you go now, they've got 4-lane roads, they've got fantastic capacity in the ITC sector, because they decided that because they are off the coast of Africa, they will become the jewel in the crown, so to speak. So a lot of the South African companies are now getting the ITC services provided through Mauritius. They set up ITC parks. They had to get a lot of broadband capacity. A lot of rich South Africans, for example, come and buy their apartments in Mauritius because they offer very safe, good infrastructure services. So even though their debt to GDP ratio is a lot higher than ours, they made a strategic move to say, we will do this because it will pay for it. And in 20, 30 years' time, we're in a lot better position. So we have to think about that. Unfortunately, people in Fiji, when they discuss debt, they only think up to their noses. They don't think about the productive capacity that we need to build into our economy. Samoa, of course, is there. These are the countries that are below us in terms of debt to GDP ratio. Well, surprisingly, Australia, if you look at that, a country that's been very rich in mineral resources, the debt to GDP ratio is still relatively high compared to what we have. A very strong economic base, but it's relatively high. And of course, because some of the decisions that they did make. And there are some of the other countries that you have there. PNG, while the debt to GDP ratio is 33.5, they're actually in a lot of issues relating to foreign exchange. The foreign reserves are extremely low at the moment. So ladies and gentlemen, that's in a nutshell. The summary is the economy is expected to grow to about 3.6%. We expect that, in fact, probably be about 3.8%. The favorable growth prospects, increased private sector investment. You see a lot of investment taking place in Fiji at the moment, a lot of factories being built, warehouses, a lot of private sector investment in terms of building homes, etc. We are very prudent with fiscal management, and we have a sustainable debt position, higher capital expenditure, operating savings, broad-based growth. I mean, I want to highlight, we talk about the tourism sector, we want to really mitigate our risks in the tourism sector. At the moment, 51% of the tourists that come to Fiji come from Australia. About 16 or 17% comes from New Zealand. So in other words, we're dependent, nearly 70% of our arrivals are dependent on only 2 countries, and 15% from North America. Can you imagine if something happens to the economy in Australia and New Zealand? There'll be less of them traveling, and we'll really feel the impact. So, as our government, our strategy is to mitigate that risk by having more Indians, more Chinese, more Europeans come to Fiji. So as a percentage of arrivals, if, for example, the overall arrival, if you broke it down as a percentage, we had 20% reliance on Australia. If Australia did not do well, that means we rely on the balance of the 80%. So that's what you call mitigating your risks. So we are partnering with Fiji Airways, for example, for them to fly to Singapore. And when they fly to Singapore, it gives us better connectivity into, for example, countries like India. India will be the largest outbound market in the world in 4 years' time. They'll have the largest group of people traveling outside their country for holidays. It gives us connectivity to the Middle East, gives us connectivity to other parts of Southeast Asia where we currently do not get arrivals from. And it gives us higher yields too. So that's how you mitigate your risks. Broad-based growth, as I said, we believe there's a lot of potential in the ITC sector. Foreign reserves at an all-time high, and inflation is set to stabilize at 3% in the medium term. Before I open up the floor, ladies and gentlemen, this is the last slide. I please want to remind you that you may get some thoughts and ideas after this presentation, after this session. If you want to make submissions, you can do so at budgetconsultationeconomy.gov.fj. You know, there are a lot of issues I know some people want to discuss. You may want to get together as a group and discuss, or you may want to get together tonight, you know, in your home. You may get a brilliant flash of idea. You want to send it across to us, please do so. But please do so before next Friday, because we need to start finalizing the budget. You can drop it off if you want to handwritten submission. You can drop it off there. I suggest you don't post it. It might take longer. You can send an email. But before I also open up the floor, it's been brought to our attention a lot of issues with the administration of TELS. A lot of issues in relation to administration of the Topper scheme and the late disbursements of funds, and also some of the allowances. The FNU students in Lautoka yesterday raised some issues regarding the quality and the quantity of food at the hostel. Maybe you have similar issues. Please highlight those to us so we can actually, when we meet up with the FNU administrators, we can also talk to them about it. But we also recognize that there are some administrative decisions that have been taken by the TSLB board that needs to be fixed up, and we'll also be meeting up with them in the next couple of weeks to ensure that the TELS and the Topper schemes works a lot better than what you have. Just to highlight that, we're at USP, and there's one particular gentleman who was saying that the allowances that they get is probably too low. They want to have it increased. If you have similar submissions, you can also make those submissions. But I just had to remind them also that we never had TELS before. We never had free education before. There are many people who wish that they had this in their time. So I'm not saying that it's perfect. What I'm saying is that there may be some administrative issues we need to fix up. Please bring it to our attention. You can send us the emails. Some of you may have personal experiences. Please bring that to our attention, email it to us, and we want to overall improve the system. Thank you very much. I'll open the floor. I'd like to focus on this end of the class. Thanks.